This is called Winter Paradise by Kathleen Rain. Now I am old and free from time. How spacious life, unbeginning, unending sky where the wind blows. The ever-moving clouds and clouds of starlings on the wing. Chaffinch and apple leaf across my garden lawn. Winter paradise with its own birds and daisies and all the near and far that the eye can see. Each blade of grass signed with the mystery, across whose face unchanging, ever-changing pass, summer and winter, day and night. Great countenance of the unknown known, you have looked upon me all my days. More loved than lover's face, more merciful than the heart, more wise than spoken word, unspoken theme, simple as earth in whom we live and move.
We gather today to celebrate the life and mourn the death of the Reverend Barbara Jane Carlson. Barbara was a daughter, a sister, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a wife, an ex-wife, and a wife again. She was a social worker, an artist, a traveler, and a minister. My name is Nathan. I am one of the ministers here at Barbara's church that she found way back in the 1970s and came back to after completing her ministry in Bloomington. Today's service is unique for a few reasons. First of all, this is my first time officiating a service for a colleague. Second, Barbara was memorialized last week at the church where she served for decades. I watched that service. It was beautiful. The choir was there. The room was packed. Actually, would you show a picture so that we can see and kind of connect the two? And can you show the online folks too? So I just want you to feel both of these are part of her memorial, that and this. Thanks. In fact, some of the elements of that service we have intertwined with this service. In Bloomington, a 40-year church member reflected on the impacts she had on the church. Some of the co-ministers who she brought into the ministry at that church shared their reflections. And her last husband, John, had some of his reflections shared as well. For Bloomington folks, if any of you are watching, we are here with you also. And this contrast, to me, is what is strange about ministry. Ministers have these two separate lives. We have the ministry we build, and then everything outside of that ministry. Last week's service was about the ministry she built. And while that is a part of today's service, this service is memorializing everything outside of that circle that by design the people in Bloomington couldn't know or see. This is the service for her family. This is the service for her church. This is the service for the community that knew her and sent her off to go serve this faith. To say it another way, this service will be incomplete. I mean, all services of remembrance are incomplete because people are too complicated to ever be fully captured in 1 hour. But in this instance, it is incomplete because of how divided her life was, as is true of many ministers. The last element of uniqueness about this service, and this doesn't have to be unique, this is for the non-clergy in the room. She wrote the service. You can do that too. She wrote the eulogy, told us which music and which poetry she would like. The prelude that you heard was the same prelude at her late husband, Reverend Clark Dewey Wells, at his service. He was her third husband. She stayed married to him until his death in 2006. He was a well-renowned Unitarian Universalist minister. I knew him because of the books he wrote that I studied in seminary, and because when I got here, I found a letter that he wrote to this church. I'm looking at our historian. Did you know this? Complaining about this church and its fundraising efforts. He copied the president of the association on that letter. The invocation is a poem that she chose. The benediction is a piece of sacred text that she chose. That one in particular, I think, speaks to who she was and how she embraced life and death. One of the interludes you will hear will be pulled from one of the hymns they used in the service in Bloomington last week. And the closing hymn was her selection. The Bloomington church seemed a little surprised by the closing hymn, as if they'd never sung it before. It is one of my favorites. It's hard to do because it's like a nighttime death Vespers hymn. So it's not always appropriate for a Sunday morning, but I think it is absolutely wonderful, and I'm glad we get to sing that by her choice to memorialize her. Normally in a service like this, I see my role is to bring in all of the theological elements that are missing. I'd usually talk about the person's belief in God, how long they were Unitarian Universalist, whether they understood an afterlife or not. In this case, I do not need to fill in any of those gaps. Instead, I want to make space in this service for the complexity of who Barbara was. I knew her personally when she moved back to Baton Rouge in 2014. She served as a brief time here as the lead of our pastoral care associates. In fact, the person who's in the sound booth today, she recruited to be one of the associates. She was always kind, always generous, always curious about my life when we talked, and she had a few glimmers of dementia when I knew her, but it was never enough to be able to tell that that was or was not part of what she had, but just little hints. At some point, right after the COVID shutdowns, she decided to move back to Bloomington, and that's where I lost her until she came back here. In Bloomington, it's where she met her last husband. From everything I can glean, the two of them loved each other a lot. When Barbara's dementia became unsafe to manage in Bloomington, her daughters moved her back to Baton Rouge. Members and clergy in this church would visit her periodically in the dementia wing of Sunshine, where she spent her final months. And I bring this up today to acknowledge how painful it was to see her in that place. She was well cared for. Her family sought to it that she was safe and comfortable and loved. But even still, it was hard to see someone who is so bright and sharp losing the ability to be fully with us. Barbara does not deserve to be remembered as solely someone who had dementia, or, from what I've heard, as not so great a driver. Is that fair? Okay. Or whatever the parts of her that were challenging. And her story should not be told without those elements either. Because part of her story is the complexity of her and the strength of who she was by overcoming some of those challenges. The truth of Barbara is she is a woman who loved this life. She loved her family. She saw to it that people were taken care of in a kind and generous and friendly way. So I invite us to begin this service of remembrance, as we do every Sunday, since probably for almost as long as she was in this church, with a chalice lighting. So I'd like to invite her family up to light the chalice, or a representative of the family, whatever you would like. And when it's lit, Vic, if you would put the words up for the chalice lighting. And we say these words together. With hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is the symbol of the power of love. So I would like to invite us to sing. If your body lets you, I invite you to rise. And those who are comfortable singers, you got to sing out for this room.
Life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I the real, though far off him that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars, I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they roar, the bells of freedom ringing. When friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When flame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? I lift my eyes, the crowd goes thin, I see the blue above it. And day by day this pathway moves, since first I learned to love it. I have that peace still in my heart, a fountain ever springing. And when my time on earth is done, how can I keep from singing?
This is called Precious and Lost by Luna Jensen. Luna was a member of this church who went to seminary around the same time as Barbara. Between our first cry and our last breath, we string together precious moments of life as pearls on a string. Then something or someone breaks the strand, and the pearls scatter everywhere. And we are all on our knees on the floor, trying to retrieve something that was precious and is now lost. A human life cannot be restrung, but we can gather together the precious moments in deep gratitude for the time we did have together. I refuse to believe that either God or the universe is cruel. That is a human failing. Instead, I trust that nothing is ever lost. All past and present make up this moment.
Good to be with you this morning and to memorialize a colleague and a friend. Everything in the world is related to everything. The human impulse to integrate all that has happened and is happening is the drive of novelty, and then novelty simply encourages more novelty and creativity. Some theologians have defined that action as creative interchange. In fact, Unitarian Universalists are proud to be part of that field of thought called process theology, and we often honor Henry Nelson Wyman, who came up with that phrase, God is creative interchange. It's a theological idea that's imposed upon no one here or anywhere. But I thought you should know about it, because Barbara certainly liked the idea. In our religious tradition, it's a matter of being together, that we make no assumptions about anybody in terms of their theology or philosophy. In fact, one is more likely to hear around here that folk, in one way or another, are still working on the questions of life's meaning, whether they be theological or philosophical, and that's probably, from my experience around this region, a stark contrast to what people are often exposed to in memorial services and funerals. In fact, it sometimes is just assumed that everybody ought to believe this, and that everybody does, and if you don't, something's wrong. But not around here. And we're here with friends, and we know, and the family understands those principles very well. These are all very straightforward approaches to religious questions and the quest for living a meaningful life. And I think Barbara Carlson, at least with the few coffee conversations we were able to have, usually after Christmas when she was coming down here to visit with family, she was still working on those questions, and I think we really all do in one way or another. But the imposition upon folk who gather together at this time or even other kinds of times, imposing certain kinds of theology or philosophy is just really problematic. For one thing, by virtue of our having minds, we're going to decide what we believe anyway. And two, we're responsible in our own way to come up with those ideas. And then three, kind of underscoring the theme of that hymn that we just sang, we're constantly working on it, whether in our 20s, 30s, 40s, or 90s. We're constantly working on the quest for meaning in our lives, are we not? The theology about creative interchange that I mentioned a while ago was very much a part of what Barbara Carlson was studying on the West Coast at that rather famous Unitarian Universalist training ground called Starr King School of Religious Leadership in Berkeley, California. And I have evidence that this is the case because I got her notes. I said, I was so interested in what you were doing in process theology. Would you send me your notes? And she sent me her bibliography and notes, and you might be interested. And I can authenticate it because she put BC right at the bottom of the notes. So if any member of the family would like them, I could easily fax them to you. Check marks, underscores, certain kinds of things that stood out on those pages. It's wonderful. She just soaked everything up over it in Berkeley because you'd go to other theological schools and take courses as well. God is novelty. And God is in the midst of everything, say her notes. Not out there somewhere disconnected, in charge of marionettes. For God is no puppet master, and we are not puppets. Those ideas, all of us, can just dismiss them this morning if you want. But it all made sense to Barbara, very much so, these understandings. And I think because these understandings necessarily open up the whole aspect of freedom for each one of us. We're endowed with that mind and the freedom, and all of this enables us to recreate ourselves as the world and reality changes. Is there anybody who knew Barbara Carlson who would say she wasn't constantly engaged in recreating herself? Wow. It is kind of unorthodox, some of those ideas, because it says pretty much an important thing about God, that God's not static, nor are we. We, by virtue of our freedom, can take backward steps, and we can take forward steps as human beings. And if we move in a positive direction through love and understanding, empathic and compassionate regard towards others, we add to creation, which then brings more joy to God, and then God changes in all of that as well. See how unorthodox it is? our love actually enhances the whole creation. And that's process theology in a nutshell. It certainly means that God is not omnipotent nor omniscient. God does not give us dementia. God does not give us cancer. To state it another way, creation is fully open, and it is again this morning for each one of us. Creation is fully open, which means our becoming is still open. It's not orthodox theology, but I'm pretty persuaded by these ideas that God grows in love over time and over the whole unfolding creation, and that everything good and positive is additive to reality. It's quite refreshing if we but take the idea into our thinking, feeling, active beings, even in these political times in this nation. In simple words, creation is not a closed book. Your lives are not a closed book. Quite the contrary. So much more good can be added to today compared to yesterday. Well, enough from the notes. I fully realize some of us need to take a breath right here on this spot. These ideas, they're certainly not original with me, though I happen to agree with them. But they compelled Barbara to embrace them herself and to share them at Star King School of Religious Leadership. It was the month of October, exactly 38 years ago, when she took that class. I put a date on the notes. She was so moved by the course that she told me about it and eventually sent me a bibliography along with some of the class notes. I thought I still had the notes somewhere, and there it was, stuck in my process theology folder. And I thought today was a good day to share something of her spiritual odyssey. Something of her spiritual odyssey, probably which she got to share with congregants that most of us in this room, maybe even her family, never really heard about or knew about. Though there would be several members of this congregation receiving a call to the Unitarian Universalist ministry, Barbara Carlson, to my knowledge, was the first in our church's history to receive the call and to go ahead and do it. Head off to seminary and become ordained as a Unitarian Universalist minister. I remember her when I arrived in the early 80s. There's a member of my search committee who will speak about Barbara in just a few minutes. Barbara, at the time that I arrived here, before this sanctuary was built, was chair of the membership committee, and an excellent position for her because she was comfortable speaking to visitors, as you know, and putting them at ease. She was so great at hospitality. It was just, I don't know, maybe it was just innate. I'm not sure, but I just think I cannot think about Barbara Carlson without thinking about her hospitality and her generosity, especially towards strangers. She was, I looked this up, she was one of three members of my committee on ministry when I first arrived. So she was part of the sounding board. There were two members of the search committee, and then there was one other person from the congregation. Barbara Carlson was suggested to be part of my committee on ministry. What a great sounding board member she was. I'd say she was particularly skilled in the social graces, and she had an idea about people and was quite tolerant and understanding, and she was a good listener. More than a few Sundays after church, she'd host a brunch at her home with some church members and friends, and sometimes I'd be invited, and I'd often arrive late, but the place would be just packed, often with social workers, because that was her profession at the time, through Catholic, she was employed with Catholic Charities. I also fondly think of the time when I joined Barbara and church member Paul Sanzenbach for some great jazz at Tipitina's in New Orleans. And I recorded in my journal at least 2 entries when I did that on 2 different occasions during Paul's sabbatical. My journal entry even said we listened to, and she's still going. I hope she's still singing, Jermaine Basil. You know, what a voice. And Paul and Barbara introduced me to what a fine jazz singer. And then we'd have, at least one evening we had dinner, the 3 of us at Mandina's on Canal Street. I mean, what great memories are being churned up here for me. I followed her progress at Starr King School and during her internship at Cleveland Unitarian Universalist Church, and then, of course, really enjoyed hearing about her ministry with her colleagues and congregation who loved her in Bloomington, Indiana, and the Unitarian Universalist Church there, and the music community of Indiana University. It's great to hear the classical music today, as well as a reference to the jazz music that she enjoyed too. I think it may have been Paul Sunzenbach and Barbara who introduced me to Keith Jarrett, because I finally ended up buying an LP, vinyl record of Keith Jarrett, that famous jazz pianist. But I wanted to share some of this spiritual stuff about Barbara Carlson. Again, so many who in the churches she served knows about this stuff, but we might not have. And then I want to get to this. Often when she was in town visiting family, usually after the Christmas holidays, we'd meet over at Brouhaha's on Jefferson for coffee. And we'd get updates on each other's political activism, social witness. Today's another social witness day in this nation. And certainly the latest stuff that we were reading. And she was an avid reader. I mean, this business of recreating herself and being open to the new and novelty in creation really was exemplified by our dear friend and colleague and family member, Barbara Carlson. Barbara extended, I would say, a generosity of spirit that made a difference in the early years of my ministry, because she was a great sounding board for a congregation the size of which I had never served before. And I think she realized that her social skills and her work as a social worker, and certainly her leadership in the church, was just a natural skill set destined for the ministry. All these pieces of, may I say, a toolbox came together for her. I remember how well, and I looked this up, as chair of the committee that hosted the Southwestern District Annual Meeting and the program. And this is before, 1 year, before the sanctuary was built. So we met at the Sheraton Hotel, and I had my fingers crossed. I don't know how many people were praying, Unitarian Universalists praying that we'd have a really great dinner and boat ride on the Mississippi River for the Saturday event. And there was no rain, and it was a catered affair, and I think all the delegates had never forgotten their experience of Baton Rouge, and Barbara was chair of that committee. Right around that time, I was writing a letter for Barbara to Starr King School of Religious Leadership. She wanted a letter of recommendation to go to seminary. You see how these pieces maybe came together for her. And things like that happen to people, and they probably have happened to you as well. It didn't rain. Perhaps we are created to recreate ourselves over and over and over again. And insofar as it helps someone or brings love or healing in the world or brings compassionate minds and hearts to the short time we have, then I believe, and this will be my theological statement, I don't know if you believe it, but I believe all this good is additive to the world. And cannot be destroyed, not even with death. Thank you, Barbara Carlson, faithful church member, welcomer to strangers. Thank you, colleague and minister who served more people than you ever knew.
Hi, I'm Holly Haymaker. We switched, so. As Steve pointed out, Barbara was a seeker. We're all seekers here. When she found something that gave her joy and promise, she didn't hoard it for herself alone. She shared it just as she shared her ministry in Bloomington, her dinner table, her thoughts, her joy in life. I wrote this without listening to Steve first, obviously, so you may get a little repetition. I'm a family doctor. I adore social workers. I could never have practiced without social workers. I'm a big fan. And she was a social worker. She practiced it, taught it, organized it, and she had that discerning eye, both naturally and by training. She could spot people she thought might share her joy. The promise she found here in our church, our beloved community. I wandered into this church one Sunday. Life was hectic. I didn't linger long, but I came back. And I lingered long enough for Barbara's eagle and discerning eye to spot me, speak to me, encourage me, and finally hand me a membership card in a way that I did not hesitate to sign on the dotted line. From both the memories I have of her here and the words shared at her wonderful Bloomington memorial service, I mean, that was so fun. The cream in our coffee, the salt in our stew, the allusions to basketball games, it was quite wonderful. From those memories, it is clear to me that her discerning eye and her joy in thought and in community, her gift for gathering and leading, shone brightly always. This firm, gentle, generous, persuasive woman chose well when she chose to be a minister. I am forever in her debt for making a place for me, for handing me that membership card to make it clear that I, too, belonged here, as I have for many years since then. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
about to hit a stone. Hope it's there.
I'm supposed to hop on that.
Yeah, there's a.
Does it fold up?
You want me to fold it up?
Yes. It'll just be sweet.
There you go.
Good morning. I'm sorry I'm causing so much bother here. Well, I've been hearing about the sober side of Barbara this morning. I knew more about Barbara's fun side. So Barbara was very proud of her Swedish heritage, and well, she should be. It's a wonderful place. So in 1985, when my husband was awarded a sabbatical and we would go spend it in Stockholm, I urged her then to plan to come and visit us while we were there because I knew we would have room for her. And my husband went to Stockholm to work. I went to Stockholm to have a good time, and I needed somebody to have it with me. He was busy all the time. So we were very glad when one morning in May of 1985, the knock at our door was Barbara, having arrived by boat from someplace in Europe, because I think there was an airstrike on with some of the airlines. Anyway, she had come on an overnight boat, which I didn't know you could do, but anyway, she had had a good start off and came in, and we had plenty of room for her, though we didn't have a lot of privacy. The apartments were laid out so that Barbara could sleep in our living room on a couch, which she didn't mind doing, and therefore save a hotel bill. Well, we did all the usual things in Stockholm. First stop was City Hall, which a really nice, interesting building, and then we saw all the old churches and visited the old town and went to the symphony, went to the opera, went from one museum to another. And the nice thing about having Barbara with me was that we could visit out-of-town places that were a day's journey, which I was kind of shy about doing that on my own in a country where I didn't speak the language. So Barbara and I went around, we saw the old city and went to the changing of the guard, which was sort of, we wondered if they had gotten a Boy Scout troop to do it, but was nothing like the formalities in England of the changing of the guard. We visited the old town, we visited every museum, I think, that was available. We went to the Grand Hotel out on the Baltic, and we went by boat, train, and bus to every place that was advised to go outside Stockholm. We had a wonderful time. Then when she got ready to leave and come home, she couldn't fly out of Stockholm because of the strike, so she had to take the bus to Oslo and fly home from there. But by the time she got to Oslo, the strike was over. But anyway, she got another look at Sweden, and the scenery between Stockholm and Oslo is particularly dramatic. Then she came home, and a few months later, we came home. And then a couple of years later, Barbara was on her way to Starkey in her car, and I rode with her because my son was living in California, and near San Francisco. So as with all journeys from Baton Rouge, we went by way of North Louisiana so we could stop at my mother's supply kitchen, because if you traveled from my mother's house, you left with enough fried chicken and other good things to last you a couple of days. So we stopped and got supplied and went our way and drove all the way. I can't remember where we stopped, but we did stop. I think it took us 3 or 4 days, and ended up in Davis, California. Spent the night with my son, and then the next day Barbara departed for Starkey, and I didn't see much of her for the next few years. But it was always fun being with Barbara. We lifed all the way to California. And by the time we got there, if anybody had listened to us, we would have had most of the problems of the world solved. But unfortunately, nobody was listening. But it was great knowing Barbara, and I am so sorry that she is not still with us. That's what you call off the cuff. Yeah, great. There.
Thank you. Good morning. When Barbara returned to Baton Rouge after her retirement from the ministry and resumed her attendance at our church, a relationship that had been pleasant and cordial prior to her leaving for the seminary became a warm and close friendship. I was happy to see her on her first Sunday back at church and pleased that she came to sit with me along with her young great-granddaughter, Isla. This became weekly, and as we chatted, we soon discovered mutual interests, especially our mutual love for music. When I mentioned to Barbara that I was a subscriber to Baton Rouge Symphony monthly concerts, she decided to join me. She offered to do the driving, and we sat together at the concerts. We also attended concerts at the LSU School of Music and occasional concerts at other venues. A little aside, when I welcomed Barbara's offer to drive to the concerts, I had no idea of her driving habits, including a tendency to veer slightly out of her lane and a tendency to look at me when she spoke to me. This was a little unsettling, especially at night, but I reasoned that since she drove between Bloomington, Indiana and Baton Rouge and arrived safely, surely whatever gods watched over her on those long drives would watch over us on our short destinations in Baton Rouge. Nonetheless, when I asked Diana Dora if she would like to join us for the symphony concerts, I asked if she would be willing to drive at times. Barbara seemed to welcome this. I was greatly relieved. Our emails continued as before when she returned to Bloomington, and that last visit to my apartment, sometime later, she shared the happy news, I knew from her earlier time at the church that Barbara was a very caring person. But I experienced this firsthand when I faced surgery following a head injury in 2017. She came to the hospital and stayed with me for several hours on the afternoon of the evening of my night surgery, simply offering a calming presence, doing soothing hand and arm massages, reading poetry and words of inspiration, reassuring me that the surgery would be successful, then giving me a warm hug as she left. She came to the hospital each day as I recovered, providing those soothing hand and arm massages and taking me for short walks in the halls. When I was discharged, she came to see me at my apartment or checked on me by phone. I have no doubt that her caring attention helped in my speedy recovery, along with the care and attention of other members of my church family. I missed Barbara when she returned to Bloomington, but our friendship continued with regular emails, always filled with her concerns for my health and hopes that all was going well at church. Her emails inevitably included reports on her attendance at concerts, especially those at the Indiana School of Music, which she enjoyed regularly, and inquiries about musical happenings in Baton Rouge. When she returned to Bloomington, she would come by to visit my apartment alone, but with her daughter, Dawn, on her last visit. Our emails continued as before when she returned to Bloomington after that last visit to my apartment. Sometimes later, she shared the happy news of engagement and moving to a new apartment. In times, our emails taped off, and when I eventually no longer got responses to emails, I was puzzled, but reasoned that perhaps Barbara was busy in her new life. However, when I learned later that she had developed dementia, I understood that this no doubt was the reason for the break in our communications, and relieved that it was not the end of our friendship. I saw Barbara only once in memory care when Diana and I visited her. I was deeply saddened that the always smiling, joy-filled, and exuberant person I had known had been changed by this debilitating disease. However, I will always remember Barbara as I knew her, a loving, warm, and caring person whose friendship enriched my life. I'm so glad that she returned to Baton Rouge, resumed membership at the church that launched her career of ministry, and that her return offered the opportunity for deepening a friendship that began many years earlier when she joined and contributed to the development of our growing church. May she rest in peace, and warm memories comfort those who knew and loved her.
The one memory also to share, I don't know if you remember this, but the way when she was about to tell you something, but she would act surprised, and she would go, oh, no one else had that experience? All right, well, she did that to me a lot. I wanted to also, her son-in-law, Jim, asked me to share these thoughts. That Barbara was always a generous person. She did not get to choose her son-in-law, but she was very gracious to accept him and be welcoming to him. There was once that Jim was hospitalized. This is when she was in Bloomington. And his words were, she got in her chariot, which is her Prius, and drove all the way from Bloomington to Baton Rouge. And she commended him on his decision to commit himself to being here. We are here to celebrate her life because she affected so many people. She was a force of nature. And Jim also wanted to thank Sunrise and Baton Rouge Hospice for all of the care that they gave to her and to her daughters, Laurel and Dawn, who did a lot of work. I'm now interpreting you, but a lot of work to take care of her in the final years. Our final tribute is going to be from her great-granddaughter, who she used to bring, pardon the pun, religiously to church.
Okay, gotta pull it up. Okay, hello. Today we're here to celebrate my grandma, Mimi, and as most of y'all know her, Barbara, and me and my family and Mimi appreciate everyone for coming, and it would make her very happy to see everyone here. My Mimi was the kind of person who appreciated life to the fullest. She taught me to appreciate the arts since I was young, whether that was dance, theater, literature, or visual arts. I have many memories watching performances or searching her walls and shelves for artwork that had a story for each piece. She loved love, and she loved the church community and sharing it with me. She loved our family, and she loved helping strangers, always happy to help them out. She always showed that love when helping anyone who came to her, stranger or friend. She showed her love to me, always going along with whatever I wanted to do, if that was put on a full puppet creation or playing our favorite card game over and over. When she was with the people she loved, she was always happy to, she was always eager to do whatever made them happy. Mimi is the kind of person that I don't think words could describe the person she was. But one word that always reminded me of her was wisdom. Mimi is a person full of knowledge and intellect. She was full of empathy and compassion. She seemed to be the person who can navigate any situation in life with grace. And for being the best person to everyone, I'd like to say thank you to Mimi. And I will remember the lessons she had taught me, keeping them close to heart throughout my life. And as we leave here today, I want everyone to carry Mimi's legacy, living each day with kindness and generosity, just as she showed us. Thank you for coming.
These are Barbara's reflections. Gratitude is the overriding theme of my life. Each morning upon arising, I gave thanks for life and another day of life. Thanks for my parents, ancestors, teachers, dear friends, and beloved daughters, Laurel and Dawn, and their children and grandchildren. How fortunate I was to grow up near the Golden Dunes in northern Indiana, the deep blue lake, the white and purple lilacs in springtime, the peonies and the rock garden where violets and lilies of the valley grew, the sweet peas and hollyhock by the cellar door. The sounds, smells, vegetation, and beauty of each season are deeply imprinted. I am grateful to my parents, Lova and Russell. Both had tragic losses in early childhood, yet they gave great kindness and care to my brother, Russell, 2 years younger, and me. They took us to the beach, picnics to Monkey Island in Michigan City, Niagara Falls, Smoky Mountains, and wonderful trips to visit great aunts and uncles on their farms in Carroll County, Indiana, where I gathered eggs and threw corn to the pigs. Attempts at milking cows were less successful. And there were my dear Swedish bachelor uncles, Carl, Louis, Harry, Eddie, and Emil, who lived in Chesterton, Indiana, in the house their father built when the family arrived from Sweden in the late 1880s. When I told my father I planned to go to college, he said, "I am a poor man, and I cannot afford to send you to college, and you have too many highfalutin ideas already." Both were true, and I replied, "That's okay, Daddy, I can do it myself." With a scholarship and a job in the dining room, it was possible to do that in those days. Some days walking down the street in Naperville, Illinois, North Central College, I was so exuberantly happy, I felt I was going to rise up in the air like Mary Poppins. I am forever grateful to Elizabeth Wiley, English literature, Dr. Walter Klass, philosophy, and Dr. Lowell Matley, sociology, whose impact on my life has endured through the years. Later, education at the LSU School of Social Work brought new knowledge, challenges, and beloved teachers, including Genevieve Miner, Harriet Dresser, and Hilda Arndt. 3 years after graduating from the School of Social Work, I received a surprise call from Dean Earl Klein, inviting me to join the faculty. I supervised graduate students in a variety of settings: family and children's services, speech and hearing, and the university mental health services. I also taught undergraduate and graduate courses during 13 years at the university. Following retirement, I worked part-time for family counseling services in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and full-time for Catholic maternity, adoption, and counseling services in Baton Rouge. Then I spent 3 amazing and inspiring years at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, where I had the opportunity to attend several schools, including Lutheran, Jesuit, Franciscan, Presbyterian, and others, as well as the Unitarian Universalist School, Starr King for Religious Leadership. At Starr King, I was invited by my beloved teacher, Dr. Claire Fisher, to co-teach a course on 2 Women for Peace, Hannah Arendt and Simone Weil. I was also invited to co-teach a course at the Center for Women's Studies. After graduation in 1990, I served as associate minister at the Shaker Heights UU Church in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1993, I was called to serve the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bloomington, Indiana, a congregation that wanted to grow. It was joy and challenge to work with the congregation on their major building project for a new sanctuary and program space. The dedication took place in 1999. I was blessed to serve with a wonderful staff and a truly great congregation for 12 years until retirement in 2005, when the congregation named me Minister Emerita. In 2014, I returned to Baton Rouge to be near my beloved daughters and grandchildren, and to the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge, which I originally joined in 1978. To the continuously creating Spirit guiding my life, even when I was stumbling or unaware, I say, thank you for the amazing gift of life and for whatever lies ahead.
Would you all join me in a moment of prayer and reflection? The God that we know when we see hope and progress and love and joy, whatever that is that has been with so many for so long, please be with us on this day. And please help us to hold the memory of the Reverend Barbara Jane Carlson, wherever her soul is right now. May she be at peace. May she know the impacts her life has had. And may those who have been left behind by her know that they are held and they are loved. May today be the day that we can remember our ability to share our love with the world and to be able to see its impacts. May today be a day that brings you comfort. May you know you are loved. Amen. like to invite us into a litany of remembrance. With each of these lines, I'll invite you to say back, we remember her. In the rising of the sun and when it goes down, in the blowing of the wind and the cold of winter, in the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, in the blueness of sky and the heat of summer, the rustling of leaves and the beauty of fall. When we read Mary Oliver, when we pay more attention to the person than the road, I mean that lovingly. When we give ourselves to make sure this world is a little better. So long as we live, she too shall live. The Reverend Barbara Jane Carlson lived on this earth for almost 91 years. She built a life, built a church, shared her love generously and widely. And after a battle with dementia, her body gave all that it could. As was her wish, her body was donated to science. And while this almost marks the end of her service, it does not mark the end of her impact, of her ministry, of her family, of the love she openly shared throughout this world. After this service, there's a reception every time the care team brings more food than is reasonable. So I will ask you all to please go in there and eat more food than is reasonable. As then you tell stories about her, and that's where she really begins being memorialized. May you know peace. May you know love. Amen. Let's look at that. Let's sing. I invite you to rise in body or spirit. And because many people don't know this, it's jubilate, not jubilate. I don't know why, that's what it is. Let's sing.
Now on land and sea descending brings the night its peace profound. Let our vesper hymn be blending with the holy calm around. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, 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 amen. Soon as dies the sunset glory, stars of heaven shine out above, telling still the ancient story, their Creator's changeless love. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, 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 amen. Now our wants and burdens leaving to the care that cares for all. Cease we fearing, cease we grieving, quietly our burdens fall. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, 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 amen. As the darkness deepens o'er us, eternal stars arise. Hope and faith and love rise glorious, shining in the Spirit skies. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, jubilate, jubilate,
This is called When I Was Born by Rabindranath Tagore. When I was born and saw the light, I was no stranger in this world. Something inscrutable, shapeless, and without words appeared in the form of my mother. So when I die, the same unknown will appear again, as ever known to me. And because I have loved this life, I will love this death as well. Let us go in peace.
Did you just walk over?